Welcome to Underworld UK, where Britain's darkest stories are brought to light. From the gritty streets of gangland London, Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham, from Curtis Warren to the Cray twins to county lines and modern-day true crime, we cover everything. Bringing you new videos every week. Subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next video is put out.
Mexico's most wanted man and the leader of the feared Jalisco New Generation CJNG drug cartel has been killed during a security operation to arrest him, the Defense Ministry has said. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, died on Sunday as he was being taken to the capital Mexico City after being seriously injured in clashes between his supporters and the army. 4 CJNG members were killed in the town of Tapalpa, the central western Jalisco state. 3 army personnel were also injured. The US had given Mexico information that assisted the operation. CJNG retaliated by setting cars alight, building roadblocks and attacking security forces in 8 states. The US State Department issued a shelter-in-place warning for US citizens in the states of Jalisco, Tamaulipas, as well as some areas in Michoacan, Guerrero and Nuevo Leon. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo later urged people to remain calm. She wrote on X that in most parts of the country, activities are proceeding normally. El Mencho, a 59-year-old former police officer, ran a vast criminal organisation responsible for trafficking huge quantities of cocaine, methamphetamine and fentanyl into the US. The US State Department had offered a $15 million, £11.1 million reward for information leading to El Mencho's capture. The Mexican Defense Ministry said in a statement that the operation was planned and executed by the country's special forces. Aircraft from the Mexican Air Force and the National Guard were also deployed. It also said that several armoured vehicles and weapons, including rocket launchers, were seized during the operation. The US had been providing information to Mexico that assisted its operation, the statement said. Eyewitnesses have filmed plumes of smoke rising over several cities, including Guadalajara, one of the host cities of the forthcoming FIFA World Cup. In the tourist hotspot of Puerto Vallarta on the Jalisco coast, potentially thousands of tourists are trapped in the resort because of the unrest. Throughout Sunday, there were reports of gunmen on the streets in Jalisco and elsewhere. The governor of Jalisco, Pablo Lemus Navarro, advised residents of the state to adhere to a code red warning and stay in their homes. He also said that public transport was suspended in the state. US carriers United Airlines and American Airlines, as well as Air Canada, have cancelled flights to Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. A flight operated by Delta Airlines bound for Guadalajara from Atlanta was diverted to Austin, according to flight tracking site FlightAware. Roadblocks have been erected and violence has spilled over into the streets in as many as 8 different states, from Guerrero on the Pacific coast to Tamaulipas in the northeast. Even the capital, Mexico City, and the surrounding Mexico state have seen incidents. Some of the worst violence has been in Jalisco itself, with masked gunmen setting fire to stores in the state capital, Guadalajara, one of the venues for this summer's FIFA World Cup. In the beach resort of Puerto Vallarta on the Jalisco coast, potentially thousands of tourists are trapped in the resort because of the unrest. It's a show of loyalty from El Mencho's foot soldiers and a show of fury at the authorities for eliminating their leader. But whether the roadblocks and burning cars are for anything more than just show, that is, whether the violence de-escalates or ramps up, will only become clear over the next few days. The reaction by law enforcement will be critical in that regard. It is a long-held truth about such transnational criminal groups that even with a cartel head as influential as Oseguera, there are inevitably 3 or 4 well-placed lieutenants on hand to replace him. Undoubtedly, though, El Mencho was key to the group's ascendancy. When he moved to the US as an undocumented immigrant in the 1980s, he'd already had his first brushes with criminality in cultivating the marijuana fields of his native state. Various arrests in the US followed as he dug deeper into narcotics crime in California, before eventually being sentenced for several years in prison in the US. Oseguera was deported back to Mexico aged 30 and began to fully immerse himself in cartel activity. He worked for the Millennial Cartel, based out of his native Michoacan, and grew in stature and reputation as a calculating and cruel boss. He was ideally placed when the cartel fractured, and from its remnants, the CJNG sprang up with Mencho at his head. Through a combination of territorial expansion and the nimbleness to pivot the cartel's activity into new and lucrative illegal activities, he turned the group into what it has become today, arguably the predominant criminal force in Mexico. His leadership and his cartel benefited from the collapse of the Sinaloa cartel after the extradition of its leader, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, to the US. Subsequent battles between warring factions in Sinaloa have ultimately torn the group apart. The New Generation cartel was on hand to hoover up an important portion of the fentanyl trade after the fall of El Chapo's sons. One of them, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, handed himself in to the US authorities and brought down his biggest rival, Ismael Zambada, with him. Mencho was a clear beneficiary of the vacuum and the dramatic sequence of events in Sinaloa. But as is so often the case in Mexican drug crime, it was not a crown he wore for long. Former US Ambassador to Mexico and Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau described Mencho as one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins. He added that Mencho's death was a great development for Mexico, the US, Latin America and the world. Who was Mencho, Mexico's most wanted man? Mike Vigil, former Chief of International Operations for the US Drug Administration, CBS, the BBC's US news partner, described the operation as one of the most significant actions undertaken in the history of drug trafficking. The killing of Mencho represents a victory for the Mexican president in a fight against the country's drug cartels. It also could strengthen her relationship with US President Donald Trump, who has threatened to target the cartels on Mexican soil. Last January, Trump told Fox News that after targeting drug trafficking boats, we are going to start now hitting land, adding that the cartels are run in Mexico. Sheinbaum later responded by saying a US troop deployment across the southern border was not on the table. However, if the security forces cannot bring the situation under control quickly, the Mexican administration's victory may be overshadowed by the cartel's violent response. The Jalisco cartel has gained notoriety for a series of attacks on security forces and public officials. It's downed an army helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade, killed dozens of state officials, and has even been known to hang the bodies of its victims from bridges to intimidate its rivals. The CJNG cartel, which had its original power base in Jalisco in 2010, is now present across Mexico. The DEA considers it to be rivaling the powerful Sinaloa cartel, which has a presence in all 50 US states. CJNG is also a key supplier of drugs to the US, earning billions from fentanyl production. Since October 2024, 9,200 pounds, 4,182 kilograms of fentanyl has been seized in the US, according to figures published by US Customs and Border Patrol in June 2025. Almost all, 96%, was intercepted at the southwest border with Mexico. Less than 1% was seized across the northern US border with Canada. The remainder was from sea routes or other US checkpoints.